April Lieben, a gorgeous blonde with eyes the color of the bright sky, stands majestically in her wedding gown, as if she were the embodiment of luxury and prosperity itself. The local church rises before her like an altar to the greatest events, framing her figure with ancient walls and historic arches. In this majestic building, she waits, filled with expectation and hope, for her fiancé, Kern Farkan. However, fate opposes this bride. Kern Farkan, an earl with a powerful past, left the world not long ago, leaving April standing alone at the altar. She, in her snow-white dress, seems like a figure from a fairy tale, forgotten in time and longing for happiness. The priest, a man in a dress reminiscent of the grandeur of church tradition, continues the wedding ceremony despite the absence of the groom. The holy place seems to be filled with magical energy, creating the illusion that love is stronger than even death. The words of the priest sound like a completed symphony playing on the strings of fate. He declares that there is no body, no death certificate, not even a funeral. His eyes reflect the conviction that April and Kern's love is too powerful to succumb to the banal confines of the mortal world. The wedding continues, and now the holy ceremony seems not just a union of two hearts, but a triumph over fate itself. Everything around you seems to be shrouded in a veil of magic, creating an atmosphere where reality and magic intertwine. April, in her splendor, stands like a queen despite her lack of a crown. This is the moment when the living and the dead, the past and the present, merge into one, giving us, the audience, the opportunity to immerse ourselves in the whirlwind of wonder and mystery of this amazing story. In April's previous life, her ex-husband had left her in the care of creditors with a huge debt of 800,000 won. This merciless burden became a shadow over her existence, creeping into every corner of her days. Left with a mountain of debt and a dream of healing her soul, she fought an uphill battle against the financial storms, striving for a brighter future. However, fate, being capricious and unpredictable, took April to a different destiny. At some inexplicable moment, she accidentally fell into the thick waters of the Han River, and the dark waters completed her past journey. Her tragic death was a passage to another life, to a world where past pain lost its power and meaning. Her rebirth brought her into the body of April Lieben, taken from the pages of the novel I Love You, Mom, which she had read shortly before her previous demise. April has found a new reality where debts have disappeared and storms have been replaced by the gentle winds of change. It is a fantasy world that has become her new home, and now she enters it with a pure heart and no shadows of the past. The light of joy sparkles in her eyes, and every breath is filled with a sense of possibility. This rebirth has not only given her a new form, but has opened the door to a world of wonder and fantasy. As a reader of I Love You, Mom, she became part of what she was reading, intertwining her destiny with the lines of the novel and creating a world around her where reality and imagination become inseparable threads. April, in her wedding wreath and snow-white gown, rebelled against the priest in whose eyes glittered the divine right to wed. Her words, filled with determination and the bitterness of betrayal, flew around in the holy space of the church like the rebukes of heaven. She argued that she could not marry the shadow of the past, the man who had carried away the light of her life. The priest, in his unyielding majesty, answered every argument with silent persistence. His words fell like a stone into April's heart, hardening her resolve. But she would not give up. Her soul rebelled against ignorance, demanding justice in the face of a love that should not be bound by the chains of the past. The church walls witnessed the clash of two views, two faiths. April blasted her words like a storm, denouncing the priest's integrity. She stood firm, like an unshakable rock, expressing her righteousness in every look and every gesture. The priest, for his part, maintained solemnity and sacred authority. His answers were like well-built mosaic stones, forming an impenetrable wall of logic and faith. He was as unyielding as an old oak tree in the face of a storm. Thus, in this spiritual battle, reality and imagination collided, leaving us waiting to see who would emerge victorious in this divine dispute filled with passion and perseverance. April and the priest, like characters from a great drama, continued to fight, and we as spectators watched their every movement intently, waiting for this exciting scene to unfold. April, in her desperate struggle against ignorance and spiritual injustice, made a bold statement to the priest, appealing to reason in this solemn moment. Her words, like a refreshing wind of change, blew through the sacred walls of the church. "This wedding cannot resurrect the Earl," she declared, looking at the priest with an expression of determination in her eyes. "I cannot allow my marriage to be ruinous to myself, for looking deep into my soul, I realize that I have not yet had time to express my consent to this union." The priest, surprised at the sudden turn of events, asked with some amazed solemnity, "Why did you become so unruly when everything was ready for the wedding? You must know that this is a holy event, created for the union of souls and the resurrection of love." April, with the power that knowledge of the future gives her, has decided that this wedding to the deceased Earl will be disastrous for her. She had read about it in a novel. It's as if the story is taken from the pages of her past, and she can't allow reality to repeat the dark predictions of the plot. April's words thus sounded like a warning against what was coming from the shadows of her own past. On that magical morning, captured by the church atmosphere, she boldly expressed her rightness, as if she were the heroine of her own novel written by fate. The argument between April and the priest became a tense dialogue where reality and fantasy were interwoven into the fabric of life, and the audience, thick with anticipation, awaited the next twist in this exciting story arc. April, suddenly seized with determination, declared that she would break her vows and reached for the marriage document to tear it up. The wedding vows seemed to slow to a solemn pace as she swiftly reached for the paper symbolizing the impending union. But the priest, as if holding on to the last thread of church sanctity, was also tugging at the document, trying to preserve the sanctity of the wedding ceremony. It was a moment of intense confrontation, where April's decision hovered between an act of determination and a fight against tradition. April's hand and the priest's hand, like two opposing streams, struggled for control of the marriage document. At that moment, the church, as if holding its breath, witnessed the unexpected turn of events. Behind them, an atmosphere of tension and internal confrontation was rising. Thus, an unexpected dispute unfolded in the center of the ceremony, like a dramatic pause waiting to be resolved. As spectators, we were interested in how this unexpected scene, where April's willpower and the priest's traditional beliefs clashed, would end. April, with a strain in every word, began to question the priest as to why he insisted on marrying her to the deceased Earl when she did not wish it. Her eyes glittered with questions, and in the shadow of the bridal wreath there was an echo of bewilderment. The priest, however, dodged direct answers like a skillful dancer. He only smiled at the subterfuge, turning the subject to April herself. "My dear, for it is your soul and your choice that is predetermined by a higher will," he replied, avoiding specific answers to her questions. April, despite the priest's persistence, did not let go of her question. She kept asking about the reasons for this insistence, trying to unravel the mystery the priest was trying to keep hidden. Thus, a dialogue resounded in the church space, tense as an unsolved mystery, where April's will and the priest's evasive answers collided. The fate of the wedding hung in the air like a light fog shrouding the mysteries, and the audience waited to see how this mystical scene, in which mystery and truth were intertwined, would be resolved, creating an enigmatic performance. Suddenly, the priest, with a haughty look, ordered April away. Two boys, as if following orders, took her by the arms and began to lead her toward the church doors. April, stunned by the unexpected turn of events, stood like a puppet in their hands. At this time, the priest, with arrogance in every word, announced to Lady Farcon that he would complete the marriage ceremony. He added that April could rest and become the Earl of Farcon's wife without even participating in her own wedding. His words sounded like an unquestionable verdict overthrowing the bride's will. April, realizing that she had lost control of her own destiny, fought the force pulling her away from the altar. Her eyes reflected bewilderment and resistance, but the two boys led her on like a puppet in their invisible hands. Thus, the conflict between the wedding ceremony and April's will unfolded in the church space, where she became a puppet in the hands of the priest's unexpected manipulations. The audience, being interested in the development of the plot, waited to see how this mysterious scene, full of intrigue and internal turbulence, would end. April, in a desperate attempt to free herself, struggled to break free of the two boys' grip, trying to take the contract. Her screams echoed through the church, filling the air with tension, but the priest chuckled haughtily and kept up the pressure. Suddenly, April's eyes began to blur. With each passing second, the picture before her eyes became less and less distinct. She struggled as if she were sinking into darkness, something unknown preventing her from keeping her thoughts clear. The priest, seizing the moment, continued to conduct the ceremony with confidence, as if he did not notice April's inner struggle. His eyes glittered with confidence in his victory, and the audience, bewildered and tense, witnessed an unusual and mysterious development. Thus, in the church space, this unusual scene turned into a real theatrical action, where mystery and dark forces became the main participants, adding a portion of mystery and drama to the intrigue. After an indeterminate amount of time, April slowly woke up in an unknown room. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the surrounding light, and her memory began to return with difficulty. It was unclear how much time had passed since she had been taken away from the church, and now she found herself in this mysterious setting. The room was filled with mystery, and the cozy semi-darkness made it feel like an unknown reality. April looked around for any hint of her whereabouts, but the space around her was still unclear. Not knowing how much time had passed, April began to reflect on her situation. She had to decide how to proceed and unravel the mysteries of this mysterious space. The dark past of the church ceremony seemed like a distant dream, but the sense of uncertainty lingered like a shadow, muffling her every movement. Thus began a new chapter in April's story, full of mystery and unknown judicial twists and turns, and the audience, as in anticipation of the next act, waited to see where this exciting awakening into the unknown would lead. In the mysterious room, an expensive statue of a bewitching, bandaged girl stood tall. Her figure radiated mystery, as if the personification of unsolved secrets. April, in despair and mixed feelings, decided to turn to the silent sculpture, as if seeking confirmation of her doubts. "Did you transport me to this strange world of romance?" April spoke up, addressing the motionless statue. In her desperate musings, however, she began to realize how absurd it was to communicate with a piece of marble. Doubt overwhelmed her, and she felt herself losing the last vestige of sanity. April shook her head vigorously, trying to banish the rambling thoughts. "This is absurd. It's not like I can talk to a statue," she said to herself, trying to regain clarity with her mind. She felt reality slipping between her fingers like grains of sand slipping away in a whirlwind of unknown forces. There was silence in the room, interrupted only by the whispering of her own thoughts. April sat in front of the statue, mixed with mixed feelings and eagerness to understand what was going on around her. At this moment, as if in anticipation of the next plot twist, the audience, witnessing this unusual interaction, waited to see where April's own path would lead her in this world of mystery and mystery. April, gripped by confusion, buried her face in her lap, sitting on the soft couch in the mysterious room. Thoughts swirled in her head like a whirlwind of feelings and questions. She tried to unravel the mystery of her new existence, unable to find an answer to the question of why exactly she, an ordinary office worker, had been reborn into the main character of the novel. April's past life seemed like a shadow restlessly weighing on her shoulders. A loan guarantee that had become a tragic epilogue resurfaced in her memories. Her boyfriend, 8 years older, had ruthlessly dumped her via messenger, leaving only a pathetic message. April remembered the pain of betrayal and her own helplessness in that moment. Why exactly did such dark pages of my past life become part of this novel? She thought, striving to understand what forces were driving her new existence. Traces of tears flickered in her eyes, and her inner dialogue with her past and present continued like a terrible memory, mingling with an inexplicable reality. April, drained by the unbearable pressure of the collectors and burdened by the dark circumstances of her past, decided to break the torturous cycle. She was desperate enough to commit suicide, searching for a way out. absorbed in the depths of her tragic experiences. Woven into the pitch-black sadness, she drank herself to death and, losing her grip on reality, fell into the cold waters of the river. Dying, she reached for the light, as if trying to cling to the last ray of hope. April remained in the dark water, tormented by troubled thoughts and painful memories. But in her last moments, something inexplicable happened. A moment of light, a ray of hope penetrated the darkness. April, as if surrendering to something greater, felt her soul tear itself from her body, soaring toward the light. The world around her soul was transformed, and mysteriously she found herself reborn, feeling the ground beneath her feet again, but in a different world. Light pierces the darkness, and April, on the edge between life and death, is reborn. A new world embraces her soul, as if opening a page of an unwritten story. She feels the ground beneath her feet again, and the mysterious adventure of her new life is just beginning. Events reveal new facets, and the moment when light penetrated the darkness becomes a turning point in April Lieben's destiny. April, reflecting on her new existence, began to realize that rebirth, while difficult, could be a blessing of sorts. After all, it was an opportunity to start fresh, free of the heavy baggage of her past life. She realized that she had a chance to create her own unique story, despite the difficulties she had faced in her previous life. However, despite this optimistic attitude, April realized that she had been reborn as the same April, whose life turned out to be quite difficult. The difficulties and storm of emotions that the novel's heroine had experienced were now her own trials. The fears, disappointments, and hard decisions she had to make were forming in her like a shadow, following her on a new journey. Thus, the newly born April realized that, despite the possibility of starting from scratch, the past was inevitably a force to be reckoned with. Her life in this mysterious world took its own unique shape, fitting into a plot full of unexpected twists and turns and unknown possibilities. April, caught in the swirling vortex of her new plot, felt her life turning into a strange dance of fate. Her stepfather, despite the ties of blood, had sold her, giving her in marriage to the dead Earl of Farcon. The wedding of souls turned out to be only the beginning of her unpredictable journey. In this world full of intrigue and secrets, April, as the virtuoso daughter of Biscaya, met many men. Her name became a legend, but her real pain and longing was lost under that mask. It was all just a game created around her. However, in her heart lurked the one and only love for the crown prince. It was a forbidden passion, hidden under the veil of a complicated relationship with her stepmother, Helena. In this tangled world, it was impossible to predict how the next twist would turn and what temptations fate would prepare. April, caught up in this tragic maelstrom, was plunged into a frenzy of jealousy. Crown Prince Ashlot, to be with Helena, his stepmother, undertook an act that shook the entire kingdom. The murder of his father, Helena's husband, became a black stain on his hands, and the capture of Helena herself was the beginning of this dark epic. April, faced with the unfathomable cruelty of love, didn't understand why Ashlot had chosen Helena. Jealousy took over her mind, and she decided to use desperate means to destroy her rival. The attempt to poison Helena was the final act of her madness. April's plans are cut short, however, when Ashlot himself, learning of her betrayal, intertwined with jealousy and love, decides to take the final step. Her fate became intertwined with his decision. April died at the hands of the man she loved in a fire of passion that burned not only her, but everything around her. A life of intrigue and mystery ended in tragedy, leaving many unanswered questions. April, realizing her bad luck, looked at her hard past life and her new path with a singular determination. "My destiny seems to be haunting me," she declared. "I was unlucky in my past life, and having been reborn in this body, I see that difficulties await me here as well. But I am ready for it. All that's left is for me to deal with the problems on my own." April, faced with the dark shades of her destiny, despite her bad luck, found strength and determination. She was ready to face the challenges on her own, rising to meet the challenges that life had in store for her in this mysterious and volatile world. The new chapter of her existence was a test, but April was determined to face it, even if she had to walk this path alone. April scrutinized the room to which she had been led. The ornately carved furniture, the antique carpets, the artfully arranged candles, all the details of her surroundings seemed ripped from the pages of a favorite novel. But in the midst of this atmosphere of courtly splendor, April's mind was troubled. Her mind battled with the strangeness of what was happening. April was familiar with what was happening in the novel I Love You, Mom, but meeting reality mixed the cards. She became part of this world where her character carries other burdens and faces new challenges. As she walked along the tall windows framed by silk curtains, she suddenly heard a subtle rustle outside the door. April's heart froze for a moment. Someone was standing there in the hallway, like a ghost from the past, secretly watching her. Her determined gaze met the glint of blue eyes reflected in the glass of the door. The door creaked open, and the priest stood before April. The priest stood in front of her, his gaze a false benevolence like a fog covering his true intentions. April felt a fire of indignation flare up in her soul. This priest, like a character in an insidious plan, was infiltrating her life for a dark purpose. The priest, moving closer, began to speak words of blessing and good wishes. But every word he spoke made April feel like she was becoming part of something sinister and inexplicable. She could sense the mystery lurking beneath the cloak of piety, and it made her resent him. "Be welcome, my lady. Your appearance in our castle is a great blessing," the priest pronounced with a hypocritical smile. April couldn't hold back an explosion of anger, but sparks of determination flickered in her eyes. This priest represented not only a spiritual challenge for her, but also a new stage of complex relationships in this castle, where every character carried his or her own load of mystery and mystery. Thus began a new chapter in April's life, and the secret intrigues already shrouded her like darkness, causing her to be strong and determined, ready to confront the wicked schemes of this mysterious priest. The priest, as if playing on his false benevolence, informed April that a carriage had arrived to pick her up. The news struck her heart like a heavy blow of an axe. A storm of thoughts swirled inside her, and she began to consider how to avoid this treacherous situation. April clenched her hands into fists and looked around the room for a way out. The thick walls of the castle seemed impenetrable, but the fire of determination flickered in her eyes. She realized that every action she took now would carry weight, and the decision would be hers, not that of a book character. "The crew! Why do they want me?" she thought, feeling the determination growing inside to not give in and become a pawn in someone else's game. She needed to act quickly and decisively. April began to weave an escape plan as if she were the heroine of her own story. Hide, deceive the guards, find secret passageways? Her mind flashed with ideas for how to counter the sinister plan being played out by this priest. She felt that every moment was becoming pivotal, and the decision she made would determine her future fate in this mysterious world, where reality and fiction intertwined in dark veins of intrigue. Unwilling to submit to the will of those who had arranged this ridiculous hoop, April reluctantly made her way toward her dead husband's estate. With every step, she felt a storm of resentment and despair exploding inside her. But fate, like a capricious force, was pushing her along this ominous path. The long road to the carriage seemed endless, and April felt the fatigue like the burden of a heavy sack. Every now and then, the winds of the Middle Ages howled, like a harbinger of storms that foresaw her unpredictable fate. And then, when the carriage was within sight, April's legs gave out on her, as if to emphasize the futility of resistance. A sudden frostbite in her legs, like a warning from fate, made her knees shake, and she fell to the soft but cold ground. The carriage and the driver's face flashed in her mind's eye as she fell, but helpless fatigue had taken its toll, and she was but a defenseless puppet in the hands of inexorable time. April felt the ground beneath her feet go away, and fear gripped her soul. At that moment, her thoughts tended toward how much she hated her life, how unfairly the pictures of her fate had been painted. The fall seemed inevitable, and the world around her became a dark void. But at the last moment, when the abyss was already welcoming her with its darkness, hands with snow-white hair were suddenly at her side. The unknown guy, like a guardian angel, intercepted her, preventing her from facing the inevitable. April felt the support, and her heart, as if it had soared in her chest, rushed toward the light. The unknown guy's snow-white hair shimmered like stars in the night sky, and his eyes radiated calmness and determination. Their gaze met, creating a moment full of mysterious connection. "Fear not, I am with you," he whispered, and his voice sounded like a wholesome chant dispelling the darkness of fear. April felt the strength filling her body again, as if this unknown guy had brought something light and reliable into her life. She didn't know what awaited her next, but at that moment, a spark of hope awoke in her heart, and she realized that this meeting would be a turning point in her difficult journey through the mysterious world of the Middle Ages. Silence reigned between them, like a magic ball in which unread chapters of fate shimmered. April couldn't take her eyes off the stranger, whose snow-white hair and eyes radiated the same unearthly beauty. At that moment, she felt her heart sink like magic created by the wizard's touch. The unknown savior remained calm, and his gaze was full of understanding. They exchanged silent messages, as if the language of their hearts was deeper than words. April felt herself becoming part of something greater than her own destiny in this moment. April's eyes reflected awe at the beauty of this stranger. In the silent exchange of glances, she felt as if she had been transported to another world, where every moment was filled with magic and mystery. Suddenly, the stranger smiled slightly, as if confirming their invisible connection. April realized that in this encounter, she found not only salvation from her fall, but also something that changed her view of this mysterious world. Fate seemed to have something special in store for her, and she was ready to follow this ethereal light that led her to this mysterious stranger. The priest's sudden coughing broke the magical moment that had been hovering between April and her white-haired savior. Her attention returned to the priest, whose eyes glittered mysteriously, as if he were reading the hidden pages of their destinies. "Do not forget, my lady, your duties and purpose," reminded the priest with a steady, false benevolence. April, sensing the attention of those around her, gently pushed the tower butler away, apologizing for the unfortunate incident. Her embarrassed gaze met the dark stare of the priest, who shrilly reminded her that the path to the earl's estate was still a long way off. At that moment, she anxiously cast one last glance in the direction of her white-haired savior, whose eyes remained impenetrable and genuinely indifferent. The savior watched her silently, not saying a word. Shadows flickered in his eyes, and April sensed that the look she met would stay in her memory for a long time. Like a touch of the unknown, the moment left a mysterious trace in her heart that would flicker in her memories for a long time to come. With a silent step, parting from April, the white-haired savior looked over his hand, as if searching for answers to unspoken questions. A shadow of curiosity flickered in his eyes, and though he realized he had done nothing untoward, a strange sensation now roamed his thoughts. As if reading mysterious messages written in the moment of salvation, he was immersed in thoughts of the lady he had chosen from the embrace of death. Curiosity flared in his heart, and questions lurked in the shadows of his eyes. The white-haired savior knew that this random moment was a turning point in his own story. He remained a silent observer, but the desire to know more about the one he'd saved now smoldered in him like a candle in the night. The sounds of a carriage were heard in the distance, and the priest, losing patience, reminded April of her urgent duties. But the white-haired savior remained in the world of his meditations, gazing into the distant distance where the figure of April, who had become a mystery to him, was disappearing, weaving the threads of fate in this mysterious middle age. The savior continued to follow April's gaze, and in his eyes flickered not only a shadow of mystery, but also a slight admiration for the strength and determination of this mysterious lady. He remained where he was, as if absorbed in thinking about what had happened. Many hours later, when night had already shrouded the world in its veil, April finally reached the carriage. At that moment, the priest offered her an escort of knights to her new home. However, meeting the priest's suggestion with an angry glance, she slammed the door with force, expressing her determination and alienation. "Let the priest do as he pleases," she muttered decisively, and ordered the coachman to depart. April's eyes darted to the dark sky, as if searching for answers to the questions that plagued her soul. The knight witnessed her struggle with the forces that wove the threads of fate, and in this dark time she vowed to herself that she would forge her own destiny, even if the path was twisted and full of secrets. The carriage, like a shadowy ship, carried her forward in this world of magic and intrigue. And April, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, was ready to meet the new challenges that lay ahead on this mysterious journey. The carriage moved forward, shaking April rhythmically in its padded seat. She sighed wistfully, each sway emphasizing the awkwardness of her position. Thoughts of the future swirled in her head like carriage wheels on a rocky road. The unknown world, magic, intrigue. All these elements weaved a colorful picture of her fate. But suddenly, the excitement faded into the background, and April's mind conjured up a picture of something familiar and cozy. She remembered her passion, a cup of iced coffee. In that instant, as the carriage shook her sights on the future, one thing became clear. A cup of that drink had become to her a symbol of comfort and ordinariness. No matter what the world has in store for me, I'll always be able to enjoy a cup of iced coffee, April thought resolutely, feeling that little vivid image inside her become a kind of amulet in her uncertain future. The carriage stopped with a rustle, as if time stood still in anticipation. A hand in a white glove knocked on the door, creating a moment of excitement in the air. April, feeling her heart beating harder, opened the door, preparing for the next stage of her unusual adventure. A young knight stood before her, his gaze filled with chivalric determination. Holding out his hand in a gesture of courtesy and willingness to help, he invited April in. But instead of gratitude, displeasure flashed in her eyes. April could feel the irritation pulsing inside her like an invisible flame. She firmly deflected the knight's hand, stepping forward with her own strength. This gentle concern seemed out of place in this world of intrigue and magic. A shadow of rejection flickered in her eyes, and she moved forward, ready for a new challenge, but not ready for the scrutiny that seemed unnecessary in this game of fate. April, showing her independence, looked into the surprised faces of the knights, whose expectations had been violated by this unusual lady. April's independence shocked them. Their worlds were unprepared for such an unexpected turn. The eyes of the knights, full of surprise and bewilderment, followed her every step. April, however, was not focused on her failures. After the failed jump had given her a bad feeling, she held her back, trying to figure out if her whole body ached from the long drive or from the failed maneuver. Suddenly her gaze locked on the lavish count's palace towering in the distance. The shining towers and patterned walls spoke of luxury and splendor. April, oblivious to her ailments, felt her attention furtively drift to this majestic world. Perhaps there, inside the palace, mysteries and answers awaited her that would turn her life upside down in this mysterious medieval age. The three-story snow-white palace rose like an exquisite lollipop amidst the surrounding green gardens. The majestic towers decorated with golden patterns pierced the heavens, as if striving to reach the stars themselves. Each floor, like a page in a luxurious book, told its own story in the beautiful language of architecture. The palace's snow-white walls were topped with exquisite balustrades, adding sophistication and majesty. Curved arches invited you inside, promising incredible discoveries and mysterious encounters. Shimmers of light flickered in every window, like diamonds scattered across the panes. The luxurious gardens surrounding the palace were a true work of art. Flowers of different colors and shapes created a magic carpet underfoot, and fountains, spraying water in a dance of light, added notes of freshness and enchanting magic to the air. The splendor of the palace was not limited to its external beauty. Every corner of this architectural marvel seemed filled with mysteries and stories, ready to reveal their secrets to those who dared to enter its magical gates. It was a place where reality merged with fairy tale, and every step promised an encounter with grandeur and sophistication. The knight, concerned by April's appearance, decided to express his concern and asked if something was bothering the lady. When she met his gaze, she replied with a smile that, on the contrary, the palace exceeded all her expectations. Her words contained not only gratitude, but also a lightness of wonder at the splendor of the world around her. There was irony underneath those words, for April, though she enjoyed the luxury of the count's palace, couldn't help but notice that money flowed like water in this place. The stately walls and elaborate decor suggested the earl's wealth and power. April realized that the secrets of this palace could be far more complex than mere wealth and luxury, and she was determined to explore every corner of it to uncover the mysteries that shrouded this beautiful three-story castle. April was still standing at the fence, looking around the grand three-story palace, which, despite its outward luxury, was in visible trouble. The building seemed unkept, as if forgotten by time, and not a single soul appeared to greet her. The mysterious silence and emptiness of the palace brought a sense of mystery and unknown secrets to the air. April, standing at the fence, felt the wind flowing through the emptiness, urging her to explore the mysterious halls and corridors of this marvelous place. With unflagging interest, she made her way to the majestic gates, ready to immerse herself in the torrent of mysteries that this three-story palace held. April flared with indignation, feeling the rage rising in her chest. None of the servants had shown up to greet her, and that added fuel to her anxiety. As she complained that the servants were beginning to disrespect her, she resolutely admired the palace, which was clearly showing signs of neglect. The knight, trying to be considerate and courteous, offered to escort April, but her pride prevented her from accepting help. She said she could manage on her own and moved forward, determined to cross the distance between the fence and the palace door. Ignoring the fountains and mazes of flowers that seemed to stand in her way, April headed for the door as if nothing could stop her in her pursuit of the clues and secrets of this mysterious place. Determination sparkled in her eyes, and in every step there was a plea absent in her face. Let the world know that April carries strength and independence. As she approached the door, April found the butler on the threshold. Their gazes held unspoken words, and the silence was evidence of a nonverbal exchange. April's eyes showed determination and a certain bewilderment at the mysteries of the castle. The butler, for his part, seemed to be the gatekeeper to unexplored secrets, and his gaze emphasized his silent friendship with this mysterious lady. There was an aura of expectation between them, as if the silence was a foretaste of things to come. April and the butler stared silently into each other's eyes, as if they were exchanging invisible signs that something wonderful and mysterious lay ahead. In that silent moment, if there were spectators around, like invisible witnesses, could feel that the beginning of the adventure had just begun, and their gazes were the keys to the door of this exciting world. The next few moments promised to be an uncharted journey through a world of magic and intrigue, where the novel's past intertwines with April's new life, and her resolve only grows stronger as she faces dark secrets and unexpected twists of fate. The splendor of the castle's facade hides depths of mystical mysteries, and April steps forward, ready to uncover the next thrilling chapter of her incredible story. April stood in front of the palace, waiting for the mysterious world beyond its doors to open up to her. But instead, when she met the silent butler's gaze, she felt a sense of excitement and misunderstanding. The boy shifted his gaze from the girl to the massive doors, as if confronted with an unexpected situation. April took the moment to order him to open the doors, but his eyes were even more perplexed. At that moment, he seemed lost in a world where every step he took seemed to disturb the ordinary. At last, under her insistence, the butler deigned to unlock the door, but there was uncertainty and confusion in his gaze. The mysterious castle that unfolded before her was imbued with an aura of mystery, and the butler himself, standing at the threshold, witnessed the collision of reality and magic. Her order and its execution created an invisible bridge between worlds, leaving him confused and understanding. The new inhabitant brought with her something unfamiliar and surprising. He seemed to freeze, listening to the echo of her determination, which was only heightened by the magic and intrigue that was developing in this wonderful world. April's gaze froze in bewilderment when the word "madam" almost came out of the butler's mouth. This unintentional display of knowledge of her status and position in the world of the castle caused a surge of frenzy within her. At that moment, as if frozen by magic, she stared at the silent servant, feeling the rage boiling inside her. The fact that the servants were already aware of her identity was an unacceptable breach of the plan. Anger, like a volcanic lava flow, rose in her chest as she realized that the secrets she had so carefully disguised herself with could have already been revealed. Her interlocutor's silence, like a deafening provocation, emphasized his culpability in the incident. An inner fire of anger flared as she realized that the servants were not so easily bypassing her presence. April was prepared for the intrigue and challenges of this new world, but not for her own personality to be the object of concern and interest. She silently, but with a furious expression on her face, continued to fix her gaze on the butler, trying to penetrate the secret thoughts that may have lurked behind his confused look. April looked up at the majestic manner, but a fire of resentment flared in her heart. She despised the insolence of the servants who hadn't even seen fit to come out to meet her. Her eyes reflected anger fueled by a sense of injustice. April was preparing to smash this castle, where blatant disrespect was accepted as truth. Her resolve became steely, and every step toward the manor seemed a portent of vengeance. The majestic walls bore witness to her anger, and her willingness to destroy this beautiful place became her dream, full of the bitterness of betrayal. April, like a storm, was about to unleash her fury on everything around her, and the manor seemed to be the first victim of this whirlwind of retribution. Her footsteps sounded like the beating of a drum, a harbinger of the storm that was rushing to the doorstep of this magnificent but condemned castle. April, who was about to launch into a powerful tirade, suddenly froze, staring at the two columns of servants. The maids and butlers, illuminated by the bright lights of the manor, silenced April. At first glance, the multifaceted procession of servants formally greeting Mistress April might have been a sign of respect. But there was hostility, contempt in the cold eyes of the servants, and they stared blankly at April as if she were not worth noting. The difference between officialdom and reality became apparent, as if a game had broken out in front of her, where every smile, every polite glance concealed a hostile intent. The servants lining their order seemed to form a wall of cold contempt, and April, sensing this invisible barrier, realized that she had entered a game in which the rules were not written in her favor. An open mouth full of angry words turned to silence. Instead of protesting at once, April felt that the first move in this complex game belonged to her. Not only was anger burning inside her, but also cunning, eager to work its way through the ominous atmosphere of the servants, willing to do anything to undermine her position in this hostile world. April introduced herself languidly, saying her new titles, Countess Farcon. But at the moment when dignity was required, she felt her confidence fade, replaced only by lethargy. The servants' answers were inarticulate, as if lost in their own speculations about their new mistress. The feeling of a bad start, of a sluggishly spoken title, pushed April to a sudden decision: to smile. She lifted the corners of her lips in a fake smile, trying to make her face look pleasant. But this fake light, that was supposed to light up in her eyes, only created awkwardness and a strange tension. The servants, stunned by this false smile of the Countess, stood in a stupor. Their gazes were confused, and their faces showed a perplexed and even frightened reaction. April, standing in the midst of this double-columned cordon, realized that in this complex game, her fake smile might have been an unexpected move, creating an unstoppable dynamic in this hostile palace. Gordon, the butler, stood before April with a polite but stern expression. He bent in a bow, as if maintaining tradition even in the new reality, and said his name. This act of politeness caused surprise among the other servants who had suddenly witnessed such a strange episode. Gordon introduced himself politely, but suddenly April interrupted him, saying that she would meet everyone tomorrow. This unexpected act of openness and independence caused the butler's face to show deep surprise. It was evident that he, accustomed to strict rules and order, had temporarily lost his usual confidence. There was a flicker of misunderstanding and slight discontent in his eyes, but he maintained his dignity and politeness in front of the new Countess Farcon. April, sighing in exhaustion, admitted that she was too exhausted to memorize the names of every servant in front of her. Her words sounded like an invisible wall between her and the servants, as if insinuating that she wasn't going to waste her energy on such trivialities as servants' names. Tiredness and indifference echoed in her voice, leaving a heavy tinge of indifference in the air. As April prepared to step away, her words continued to hang in the air, like a shadow falling on an uncertain future in this mystical castle. She saw neither understanding nor approval among the shocked looks of the servants. She couldn't understand why they were trying so hard to please her if her presence was causing their outright displeasure. April ignored the questioning glances and ordered her to her chambers to organize dinner, explaining that she hadn't eaten all day. Her determination at this point was markedly different from her previous lethargy. She climbed the steps, sending the servants off to carry out her instructions. The butler, still in a bow, asked what else would happen after dinner. April, halfway to her chambers, briefly replied that she would like to take a bath after dinner. There was an unmistakable confidence in her voice, as if she were the mistress of the castle, and her wishes should be obeyed without objection. April walked slowly up the stairs, her footsteps sounding like a quiet tune in the silence of the castle. At that moment, the butler's gaze flicked to one of the maids, and like lightning, she instantly realized that she was to show the new Countess of Farcon to her room. As if under the influence of a secret command, the maid ran forward, heading toward April's rooms. Her movements were quick, as if she had mixed feelings: excitement at being part of an important moment, and some anxiety about the unknown, which she was careful to conceal. With a graceful bow, the maid ran up to April, showing her loyalty and willingness to do whatever the new countess instructed. Her eyes flashed with respect, and a gleam of devotion sparkled in her gaze. April seized the moment and ordered the maid to show her the way to her new quarters. Her command sounded like a regal decree, imbued with a touch of pride. The maid, obediently led by her new mistress, assumed the role of guide in this labyrinth of ancient corridors and halls. Guiding April through shadows and light, she instilled confidence that this was the first time the new countess had taken the threads of control of this mysterious castle into her own hands. Suddenly, April slowed her step and looked up from the second floor and addressed the servants with a polite smile. There was a muffled alarm in her words as she asked the servants to hurry up with dinner, claiming she wasn't feeling too well. This little request was quite tense, as if there were unspoken threats lurking in the shadows of her words, making the atmosphere in the castle even more tense. But April, looking down as if she were the queen of her palace, continued to maintain her polite smile, creating a mysterious play of light and shadow on her face. At that moment, the servants sensed that something more complex lurked behind the heroine's every word, and their own secret thoughts began to interact with the unknown power inherent in this mysterious world. But April, looking down like the queen of her palace, continued to maintain her polite smile, creating a mysterious play of light and shadow on her face. At that moment, the servants sensed that something more complex lurked behind the heroine's every word, and their own secret thoughts began to interact with the unknown power inherent in this mysterious world. From the moment Mistress April left, as if removing an invisible shadow, the servants breathed a sigh of relief. Her absence had left a sense of liberation, as if they had been freed from the invisible shackles of her stern gaze. A muted storm of conversation erupted in the corridors of the palace, where servants began to discuss Mistress April's unusually strong and determined character. "Mistress April is a woman of steely will, as if forged in the fire of adversity," whispered one of the servants, leaning toward a colleague. Her strictness and perfect command of the situation invariably commanded respect, but at the same time planted a kind of fear in the hearts of the servants, as if their every action were subject to her scrutiny. So in the corridors of the palace sounded a symphony of rumors and opinions, and the character of Mrs. April Lieben, the reborn heroine, turned into a topic for hidden conversations under the vaults of the ancient castle. The butler, realizing the need for honesty before their new mistress, sighed heavily, putting his thoughts in order. A determined glow flashed in his eyes, a willingness to open up to this strong woman. The furniture, immersed in semi-darkness, shone under the mysterious light, revealing its exquisite charm. The gold and silver patterns on the soft cushions and curtains shimmered like gems on the blanket of night. The atmosphere in the room was permeated not only with moonlight, but also with mysterious energy, as if the moon itself filled the space with mysterious magic. At this time, April, framed by the rays of bright moonlight, sat in a dark room that was flooded by the crystal pallor of the night light. The room shimmered with a fairy tale atmosphere, like a magical space where every shadow and light ray became a play of magic. The fabrics enveloping the furniture merged smoothly with the moonbeams, creating the image of a magical symphony. When dinner was finally served, April, holding her stomach from the long wait, expressed her displeasure. The light from the moon played across her face, highlighting an expression of irritation and hunger. Starlight twinkled through the dark curtains of the room, as if inviting her to forget her daily worries and immerse herself in the magic of this unfathomable world. Suddenly, April's eyes fell on the tray the maid had brought. It was nothing more than a loaf of stale bread. A wave of disappointment and anger swept over her like a sudden storm that shattered the idol of her expectations. Keeping her outward appearance elevated, she gingerly picked up the bread and began to express her displeasure. "How dare you?" came her words, but the anger was not only in her speech, but in her every movement. She described exactly what standards of courtly refreshment had been violated by this humble loaf. April emphasized how she, in her position, deserved better than plain bread. Her voice sounded like a thunderstorm, and there were notes of disappointment and indignation in every word. April went through every detail of serving, identifying flaws with undeniable logic and rigor. Each sentence was like a blow aimed at inconsiderate servants. She emphasized that respect for the Countess required an appropriate meal, and such disrespect would not be tolerated again. Her anger was like lightning illuminating a dark palace, and at that moment the servants realized that something more appropriate than stale bread must be brought to the table. The maid bowed, her eyes swallowed a moment's apology, and she spoke the words of apology unhesitatingly. Her voice sounded quiet and humble, as if she realized the greatness of her transgression. "I apologize, Mistress April. That is all we have available today," she whispered, bowing low before the Countess. April's eyes turned ice-cold in response. She didn't believe the maid's words, thinking that there must be many more opportunities in the county. Her smile, on the other hand, took on a cold hue, like a bright moon on a dark night. April glared at the maid as if she had upset the delicate balance of respect. With unconcealed anger in her voice, April uttered, "Is there not even a decent treat to be found in the county for her mistress? Is it so difficult to provide a decent dinner among the castles and valleys subject to this historic house?" Her voice was like the rending of a thunderous sky, ready to utter its full force. April angrily put down the bread, as if pushing something away from her, and said that she was in a bad mood today. It was as if the Countess was showing her displeasure, and the bread was a symbol of disappointed expectations. The maid, exposed to the Countess's sudden anger, could not hold back her tears. Her face contorted with fright, and then tears ran down her cheeks like raindrops on glass. April hadn't even expected such a reaction at first, but her anger remained unrelenting. April stared at the maid in bewilderment, trying to understand how words and gesture alone could have caused such a reaction. There was inquiry in her gaze, but at the same time, she maintained an air of equanimity. She could be stern, but even countesses could be misunderstood. April, increasing the tension in the air, asked the maid if she thought the Countess would forgive her for her weakness. The maid, however, cried even harder in response, as if her heart were breaking for fear of punishment. April, suddenly silent, felt an inner turmoil within her. Mixed feelings of guilt and misunderstanding flashed in her eyes. She hadn't expected such a reaction, and now she found that her strictness had led to tears. Finally, April covered her face with her palms, as if trying to hide her embarrassment. With an order to leave, she pronounced that the maid was not guilty of anything. At this point, tension hung in the room, and the Countess realized that even her own emotions could be an unexpected twist in this mysterious story. April, who had taken the initiative, asked if she could have a bath. Her voice sounded like a demand, and in that moment, the insistence of someone who was used to getting what she deserved was evident in her gaze. The maid, without losing her smile, replied that unfortunately they had only cold water. This statement did not leave the Countess indifferent. Her face instantly showed disappointment and a hint of displeasure. April, being accustomed to the best, found it hard to accept the idea that even the water in which she must dip herself remained insufficiently luxurious. April was pierced with frustration and anger, like lightning tearing through a dark sky. Her eyes flickered with inner lightning bolts of discontent from her heated misunderstanding. Despite the maid's smile and her words, the Countess retained an unwavering distrust within her. April's gaze became like a probe, probing the truthfulness of the maid's every word and intention. She sensed that this answer was just part of an elaborate game, and the Countess, despite her outward calmness, was ready to defend her demands. April's frustration and anger soared through the air, creating an atmosphere of tension around her. April exploded with a loud scream, her anger at the servants here bursting out like a storm that broke the silence of the castle. Her scream was like a lightning strike, drawing the attention of not only the servants, but also the butler, who instantly stopped in his worries and looked up. The butler, looking at the Countess with surprise and some alarm, instantly realized that something serious had happened. At the same time, the maid who had come with him was experiencing mixed feelings of fear and guilt, as if her own actions had caused this explosion of emotion. Tension was in the air, and the attention of the others was fixed on the Countess, whose eyes glittered with anger, creating an aura around her that was inaccessible to conversation. When the butler entered, he saw a disappointing scene. An angry April holding a crying maid by the face, forcing her to chew stale bread. Tension hung in the room like an electrical charge, and even the air seemed soaked with the oppression of discontent. April did not let go of the maid, as if she wanted her anger to become part of the living picture, a secret unknown to all but those involved in the drama. The butler stopped, stunned by the spectacle that was playing out before his eyes. His gaze flickered between the Countess and the maid, trying to figure out what had caused this expression of anger. The maid's tearful face and April's impassive expression created a dissonance in the normally quiet atmosphere of the castle. April angrily and sarcastically informed the butler and invited him to share his dinner with the servant. With a note of irony in her voice, she said reproachfully, "Since this loaf is probably the last meal in this castle, let's share it with the servants, since they don't seem to have anything to eat." These words pierced the air, creating an atmosphere of discontent and outrage. April was crying out for justice, bringing to light the problem of inequality in this house. Her speech was an arrow to the heart of the problem, and in that moment, the Countess became a symbol of the struggle for her rights and the rights of the servants in this wonderful but unequal world. April glanced around and assumed that this castle was either empty or had everything she needed but didn't want to provide it. Her eyes flickered with discontent and determination to find out the truth. The butler replied, confirming that April was right. He bowed slightly and agreed with the Countess, as if recognizing that there was some truth in what she said. April exploded with anger again, saying that the servants were insolent for so blatantly stating that they didn't want to bring her a proper dinner. She was determined not to let her rights be violated, and she decided that the butler's words only confirmed the second option. Everything was here, but they wouldn't give it to her. April, staring absently at the butler, sensed that her assumptions about a castle full of secrets and treasures were fundamentally flawed. Instead of luxury and abundance, she was faced with the unpleasant reality of a lack of finances. The butler, raising his hand as a sign of respect, asked another maid, Nora, to fetch the ledger. At that moment it became clear that the secrets of the castle were not jewels or magic, but ledgers and figures. April felt disappointment mingle with her anger. Self-loathing for her mistaken assumptions pierced her, and she realized that this castle was not a fairy tale hideaway, but rather a place where even fantasies of financial prosperity came true in the form of blank ledger pages. April Lieben took the ledger from the maid's hands, feeling the weight of her responsibility. The pages smelled of antiquity and debt, as if the paper itself bore the burden of Earl Farkin's past mistakes. April glanced at the lines of numbers, and disappointment flashed through her heart like lost hope. The castle's finances met her gaze like a dark shadow covering their entire future fate. Every figure on the pages seemed weighted with debt, like chains that prevented free breathing. Count Farcon, it turned out, had left not only mysterious obligations, but a financial footprint in the sands of time. In this world where magic interacts with reality, April has realized that her fate now carries the weight of unpaid bills. Even after being reborn in the novel, she is confronted with the Earl's dark legacy, and her life unwittingly becomes a shadowy fairy tale imbued with unfulfilled promises. As if the magic of this world was playing with her senses, April felt the oppressive weight of debt, as if she were destined to walk through magical portals, but with the burden of the past on her shoulders. Her inner world had become an atmosphere of adversity, and she realized that to change her fate would be to come face to face with the world of finance and intrigue. April Lieben, plunged into the depths of despair, tried unsuccessfully to take what was happening with humor, as if it could all be just a joke. She held the ledger up to the butler with a trembling hand and, with a glint of hope in her eyes, asked him a question. "It's probably just a joke, right?" In response, however, she met the butler's cold gaze, as if he were reading something incredibly important into those grim figures. The butler, with a tone that preserved indifference, dashed her last hopes by saying, "Debt is not cloaked in the mask of a joke, madam. In this world it is measured not just in gold, but in billions of gold." Count Farkon was a man accustomed to luxury and debt that matched his power. That responsibility now falls to you. Despair enveloped April, as if a shadow of hope had faded into the past. She was thrashing around in a maelstrom of incredible numbers, and realized that now she not only had to figure out how to get out of the debt hole, but how to stay on the surface of this gloom. But despite her helplessness, she was facing a challenge that required not only intellectual effort, but also willpower. Despair flickered in April's gaze, but she couldn't find the words, just smiled foolishly back at those unyielding figures. That smile, though it expressed helplessness, was like a ray of light in a dark corridor of uncharted difficulties. Now it was up to her to transform this smile into a tool that would help her overcome every billion gold debts and change her destiny. April inwardly struggled with an incredible sense of injustice, unable to accept the fact that even in this exciting world full of magic and mystery, her life had begun with the burden of debt. This sense of unjustified obligation pierced her like a cold blade, shattering the illusion of a new beginning in the novel. The fire of resentment flickered in her eyes, the sparks of which expressed not only bewilderment at how this could have happened, but also a determination not to give in to this foreign burden. Even in this fantasy world, where magic permeated every aspect of life, debt was a shadowy companion. With each breath, April felt anger and despair mingle in her heart. But the light of determination burned in her eyes, emphasizing that she wasn't going to accept this useless burden without a fight. She couldn't simply accept the fate that the magical pages of the novel had forced upon her. Thus began her inner battle, and April, having been reborn into this world, was determined not to let debts determine her fate. Her life became not just an adventure, but a test of willpower that she was about to face, transforming her despair into a powerful source of magic that could change her destiny and the very world around her. April couldn't find peace that night, her eyes piercing the darkness as if searching for answers in the darkness of the night. She sat with her elbows resting on the cold table in her room, the mysterious light from the moon. Her eyes were filled with frustration and sadness, and her inner world vibrated with implacable helplessness. She had expected to feel the luxuries and pleasures of life at her fingertips in this new life, but even here, amidst the magic and wonder, debts followed her like intrusive shadows. April dreamed of a vacation from her worries, but instead, her days began and ended with incessant worry. She felt like a trapped bird, despite the beauty of the world. Debts became a heavy fetter, shackling her in a castle of restlessness. But April was like a flame in the darkness, unquenchable and strong. She refused to sink into the abysses of despair, daring to take on the challenge of making this nightmare an inspirational story. April glanced out the window, where the sun brightly lit the sky. Determination flashed in her eyes. Even if debts became an invisible thread, the magic of this world would always enliven her heart. And in this battle for her place in the sunlight, she had gained something that not even debt could take away from her: strength and perseverance. April Lieben accepted the challenge of the night, ready to awaken the magic that could change her destiny. The day stretched before April with light, but her soul was dark with anger and frustration. Suddenly, like an echo of her inner raging anger, she began beating her pillow, expressing her emotions in every blow. Her screams echoed through the room, as if a challenge to all the forces that opposed her in this world. "Must get a divorce!" she roared, as if exploding with energy, ready to tear down all the boundaries that limited her freedom. In every cry, there was pain, but also determination, as the lightning bolts of anger flashed in her eyes, ready to light the way to change. But suddenly, she was interrupted by the attention of the housekeeper, Nora. The woman entered the room despite April's whirlwind of emotion. Nora looked at her with indifference, as if debt and emotion were nothing surprising to her. Nora, with a chilled look, suddenly decided to interrupt this whirlwind of emotions and introduce herself. "I am Nora, the housekeeper of your castle. The fate of this place is now in your hands, madam." That moment was like a sudden slap in the face that stopped April in her furious whirlwind attack. She glanced at Nora, as if only now realizing that in this world her words and actions carried weight, and that every choice carried not only personal consequences, but the fate of the castle and its inhabitants. April, feeling hungry, decided to approach the servants for breakfast, believing that even in this world she could enjoy the simple joy of food. To her surprise, however, the servants looked away in embarrassment, unable to provide her with what seemed like a normal request. "Maybe there won't be any breakfast?" April raised her eyebrows, turning to the servants, hoping for sanity. However, the answer was only a confused look from the servants, and April decided to lower her demands. "At least some stale bread?" she offered, and there was already a hint of desperation in her voice. But even this request was not to be realized. The butler, with a reproachful look, announced that not even bread could be provided. April stared at him in amazement, waiting for an explanation. "Why? Someone should have prepared breakfast," she was indignant. But then the butler, as if revealing a secret, announced, "A guest has come to see you, madam. He has been waiting for you in the hall, and our attention has been entirely directed to his service." Anger gave way to surprise in April's eyes. She couldn't have guessed that on this day, her usual breakfast request would be a prerequisite for meeting an unexpected guest. In that moment, she realized that even the most ordinary things in this world could be involved in intrigue and events she didn't yet know about. Frustrated and inwardly anxious, April slowly paced the long corridors of the castle. Complex emotions were stirring in her chest, and she longed for the simple pleasure of breakfast, which had been denied her. At this moment, she was anticipating the look on the face of the one who dared to disturb her ordinariness. When she entered the hall, however, it wasn't any of the servants or bustling staff, but the same white-haired guy who had saved her from falling to the ground. April's eyes flashed with amazement, then understanding. "So you're my unexpected guest, then?" she said mentally, surprise changing to a slight smile. This time meeting him had been, despite all the difficulties of the day, a pleasant experience. The white-haired boy smiled back, as if to imply that his appearance was more than just a chance encounter. Their gazes collided in a moment, and something inexpressible hung in the air, as if the magic of this world began to control even the smallest of events. April, though frustrated by her failures, now felt that her upcoming meeting with this mysterious guest would take an unusual turn, and that was her new hope. April, stepping into the Count's castle, was greeted by a boy with a dazzling smile, the brightness of which equaled the rays of the sun. He gracefully introduced himself as the Duke of Fitzren, a representative of the ancient family that had founded the Biscayan Empire. His words sounded like a melody framed by nobility. April gazed admiringly at the Duke, feeling the majesty of the castle combined with the grandeur of its representative. The Duke, like a character from a novel, embodied sophistication and power, adding to this mysterious world. His bright smile carried the promise of adventure and secrets ready to unfold beneath the castle arches. The butler, leading April majestically through the castle, brought a note of mystery to the air. He spoke of the glorious times and families that had influenced the fate of this world. In every word, there was pride in the heritage that matured on the walls of the ancient castle. Under the Duke's guidance, April plumbed the depths of the palace, where every room seemed like a place for new discoveries. Narrow corridors and mysterious passages turned the journey into a fascinating labyrinth full of riddles and secrets. The Duke of Fitzgren, the center of nobility and power, revealed his soul to April, as if inviting her to be part of this magnificent story. The vicissitudes of the family, the victories and defeats, came through in his stories, creating pictures of the past that became vivid in her memory. Thus, meeting the Duke of Fitzrin in this wonderful world was not just an introduction, but an immersive experience where every look, smile, and word awakened the spirit of adventure in April's heart. In the arms of Lake Fitzrin, Lord of the Wizard Tower, April felt the magic of the air, filled with mystery and enchantment. The Lord, like magic incarnate, held out his hand to her, inviting her into his world. The glow of his eyes reflected not only the power of the enchantments, but also the majesty of the Lord's dignity. April, despite the excitement within her, boldly extended her hand in return for the kindness and greeting. The clash of their hands symbolized the joining of April and Lord Lake's world. In that moment, she felt the magic flowing through her herself like part of a magic spell. The gentle kiss on Lake's outstretched hand was like a magical touch that made time slow down. It was a kiss that spoke of age-old secrets and the promise of new adventures. Like a wizard, Lake transported April to another world where every moment was filled with magic and romance. An epical meeting with the Lord of the Wizard Tower was the beginning of a new chapter in April's life. Her heart, forgotten by time, awoke to the magic of this mystical place. In the arms of Lord Lake Fitzrin, she felt the reality of the novel merge with her new reality, creating an amazing cocktail of enchanting moments and magical experiences. The boy's smile was like a ray of light that penetrated April's heart, leaving behind a gentle warmth. But the sudden application of his words made her gaze falter. He stated that he had come to congratulate his late friend on his wedding. At that moment, as if time had slowed down, the moment became vague and mysterious. April, confused and startled by the unexpected turn, met his words in silence. The boy's face, which a moment ago had radiated light and benevolence, now carried a shadow of mystery. Her heart beat uncertainly, as if in a mingling of feelings, from the tenderness of his smile to the uncertainty of his statement. To congratulate a late friend on his wedding, April pondered, going over the events and characters of this wonderful world in her mind. What was behind this mysterious congratulation? Lake might not be aware of the situation, and his words, like a key, unlocked the door to new mysteries and unexpected twists and turns. So began a new chapter in April's adventures, where mystery intertwines with reality, and a castle filled with magic hides not only magical secrets, but also dark riddles of the past. At that moment, like a character in a novel, April found herself in a whirlwind of intrigue and mystery, where every step led to a new discovery. April, trying to penetrate the essence of Lake's mysterious words, offered to sit down and discuss all the details. Their gazes met, as if in that moment each of them felt that something unusual was happening. They sat down on antique chairs, as if on a throne in a castle where every object held its own story. April, with secret questions flickering in her eyes, started the conversation. She thought about Lake's words about wanting to congratulate his late friend. Talking about Earl Farkin's wedding was rather odd, since April's late husband had been around 44 years of age, and she found it odd that Lake was talking about being friends with him. Her thoughts sounded like a cool breeze calling for clarity. Lake, looking as if lost in his own thoughts, slowly began to reveal the cards of the past. He spoke of his friendship with the Earl, of how they had shared wisdom and perspectives on life. There was a warmth of memory in his words, but April's eyes lit up with disbelief. Thus, the conversation with the Lord of the Wizard Tower turned into a scene from a novel, where the heroine encounters incomprehensible riddles and opens new chapters of her story. Every phrase of Lake's lurked a part of the mystery, and April, like a detective, began to uncover the dark secrets that this mysterious wedding hid behind it.